This is Aaron Cadieux and Manny Familare, co-directors of the Bridgewater Triangle documentary, with director's commentary on the film.
Okay.
And we're off and running. So we've gotten a lot of compliments on the opening credits of the film. They're kind of unique from anything that's been seen prior in a work of this kind. And they seem to draw people into what they're about to see. The opening credits first credit Loren Coleman as being the gentleman who came up with the concept of the Bridgewater Triangle, and that is correct. One little thing about that is it actually was mentioned for the first time in a Boston Magazine article in 1980. The film kind of portrays it that it was mentioned for the first time in Mysterious America, but that's actually not the case. Mysterious America brought it to national attention or international attention, but it was actually first mentioned in a Boston Magazine article. Manny?
I don't have anything to say so far. I'll get through the credits.
And there's John Horgan, who is the voice of the Bridgewater Triangle, and he did an absolutely fantastic job with the narration.
The vector images are good here, the maps are like...
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about that is it was a cost-cutting measure that all of those vector maps and images were produced in-house. And we used pre-existing maps that we couldn't afford to pay the rights to just use as a foundation for our vector maps. That's one of the best shots in the movie, those trees moving by. I think it's one of my favorites, the Freetown State Forest trees.
Yeah, everybody likes that one.
I think one of the things that's nice about this film is that it really shows the geography of the area for people that aren't from Massachusetts. A lot of people think that just the Hockomock Swamp is the Bridgewater Triangle, when this film does a good job of illustrating that the Hockomock Swamp is just a portion of the Bridgewater Triangle rather than the entire triangle itself.
Living in Massachusetts and being into the unusual, you hear about the Bridgewater.
This is Jeff Belanger. He is a writer for Ghost Adventures and a very well-known personality in the paranormal field.
Shortly after shooting that clip, we had to move to a different location due to a person playing the drums.
Yeah, we were recording right next to somebody's house, and they saw us recording it out there, and just to be a dick, the guy decided to stop playing his drum set. It's kind of a neat illustration right there with a lot of the articles flying around over the map. I think Chris Pittman was by far one of the most articulate interviews I've ever shot.
Yeah, Chris has been featured on a lot of episodes of Ancient Aliens as well.
Yeah, he's a very, very articulate guy, very well spoken. He's featured a lot in the documentary. I would venture to guess that he might be featured the most out of anybody.
Yeah, I think he is. He's also going to be featured in a movie, I believe the name of it is 701. It's a movie about UFOs that was shot, I think, in the LA area. Loren Coleman's also in that.
Yes, Chris Balzano possibly has written more about the Bridgewater Triangle than anybody, with his Ghost of the Bridgewater Triangle and Doc Wood's books. I'm a big fan of Doc Wood's, particularly a chapter dealing with a witch that haunts a group of boys living near the Freetown State Forest. It was a story that we weren't able to feature in the documentary because the witnesses would not retell their stories. They're listed as anonymous in his book, so I think to be seen on camera to tell your story is a little bit different than being listed in a book. You can see the Bridgewater Triangle there, as it's mentioned in numerous different publications.
I think that last one was Weird Massachusetts.
Yeah, it was Weird Massachusetts, Ghosts of the South Coast by Tim Weisberg, and a chapter from Doc Woods, and there you see Doc Woods and Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle on the screen.
And both of those books can be found on Amazon.com as well as, I believe, his website.
Exactly. It's one of the more interesting parts of the film coming up, where we talk about the theory of a Native American connection to the Bridgewater Triangle. And Native American participation in the film was something that we probably would have liked to have had more of. But they tend to be very protective of their history and very selective of who they talk to, and that's understandable after all the bullshit that they've put up with through the years.
Well, that map that we just saw was made by you as well.
Yeah, that was
From scratch.
a map of the colonies prior to the existence of the United States, and it shows that southeastern Massachusetts was actually Plymouth Colony. Here you see it right there on the map.
No, that's actually not, this is not stock footage. This is footage that you actually shot.
Yeah, this is footage that I
Yeah.
shot and own the rights to here. But yeah, you can see here it illustrates a lot of the towns that are linked with the Bridgewater Triangle that were affected during King Philip's War. And we present the theory of King Philip's War as a cause of the negative energy in the Bridgewater Triangle as just that, a theory. We're not trying to say that this is legit. We're just presenting it as a theory. But we felt that it was an important theory to cover, especially since there's so many connections made between Native American history and the Bridgewater Triangle.
Turned in favor of colonial troops, and native resistance began to crumble. In August of 1676,
All of these images here are pre-1923 woodblock carvings of King Philip's War. So these are all public domain images, which we were lucky enough to find. And when you're working with public domain images, you don't have to pay anybody to use them.
That scene was shot at an antique store in East Bridgewater.
With Joe Murray, yeah, a couple of the
Yeah.
interviews we feature were shot at that location.
It's actually his mother's store, actually.
Joe Murray provides some background information on the Native American history and connections to the Bridgewater Triangle. He actually is part Wampanoag and part Abenaki, maybe? I'm not sure.
I think so.
As far as we can tell historically, both were sold in slavery.
He looks a lot different now. He doesn't have the mohawk anymore and doesn't have the beard.
bloodiest conflict
Yeah, he's not really recognizable.
in New England's combined population was killed in the struggle. Today, various residents cite a native
And here we're talking about the potential
cause of strange
of a Native American curse, or the theory of a Native American curse on the Bridgewater Triangle region. We're not presenting it as fact, just a theory. And it's Tim Weisberg.
That's the actual in studio of Spooky South Coast.
Yeah, Tim is one of the hosts of Spooky South Coast, a pretty popular radio show down in southeastern Massachusetts. And there's his book, Ghosts of the South Coast.
We've been featured on that a couple times.
Yeah, Tim's been a great ally for us in helping to promote the film and get the word out. He does a lot of work in the paranormal, and he's a writer for the Standard Times newspaper in New Bedford, and also does a lot of writing on the side.
Paranormal activity, but just another byproduct.
He has quite an extensive list of connections in the paranormal business.
Skirmish, and it's something that is just inherent in the land.
He and Jeff Belanger are particularly close friends, good friends. There's one of the time lapses that Manny had shot with the GoPro camera,
Yeah,
which we used to transition into different parts of the film.
yeah, the GoPro does a great job of doing images like that. That's Lake Nippenicket behind Chris.
And here's a map of the Hockomock Swamp and how it crosses into a number of towns in the Bridgewater region. But you can see from that map that the Hockomock Swamp is just a portion of the Bridgewater Triangle. We shot this film using the Sony PMW EX1 high definition camera with a Lattice 35mm adapter for all you tech geeks out there. And it's a way to achieve that nice shallow cinematic depth of field. It was one of the better shots of the Hockomock Swamp. Another shot of the Hockomock Swamp here. That was shot in springtime where the water level was at its highest. That was actually Manny that said, "Hey, the swamp looks good right now. We should go get some B-roll." So we went out and shot it.
Yeah, that area looks completely different if it's not the spring.
We drew quite a crowd that day going to shoot that scene at the Hockomock Swamp. We had a woman walking her dog, and her dog was like sniffing at our crotches and whatnot while we were trying to get the shots done.
Believe it or not, that scene that you just saw right there too is walking distance from where Jeff is right now. It's right.
These shots
Right next
here were
door.
shot last May of 2013. We Manny, Johnny D'Souza, and myself walked the paths of the Hockomock Swamp to collect pretty much most of the B-roll that you see of the Hockomock Swamp was obtained that day.
The right context for people to understand
That was a busy day.
what goes through the Hockomock Swamp is.
That was shot in the spring, I believe. I think that was the same day that we shot that. They were
Yeah.
getting sniffed at by the dog.
Mm-hmm. There's Johnny D'Souza right there.
Yeah, there's the Johnny's back of the head. Featured a couple times that shot, once in the beginning, once towards the end of the film.
Trappers and outdoorsmen.
The Hockomock Swamp has long been the focus of crypto.
These are some sculptures from the International Cryptozoology Museum up in Maine, run by Lauren Coleman, the godfather of the Bridgewater Triangle, the guy who came up with the concept.
Here's the beginning of Brian Bicknell's images.
Yeah, those hand-drawn black and white illustrations were done by Brian Bicknell, and he did a fantastic job for us. Brian has a background in drawing for comic books. There's a very young picture of Lauren Coleman as he's introduced in the film. And that's him at his museum when we went to shoot that interview with him.
That was actually Mother's Day.
I
That we
remember
were
that.
up there.
And we drove up to Portland to shoot that. Here's a shot of that Boston magazine article that originally coined the phrase the Bridgewater Triangle. Actually was not Mysterious America. Mysterious America was the national debut of the term. Here's another vector map illustration. You can see that how small of a portion of the Bridgewater Triangle that the Hockomock Swamp actually is.
In 1983, Coleman published his most famous work.
And there's Coleman's book Mysterious America.
In a chapter
And there's the first mention of the Bridgewater Triangle in that book.
Coleman dubbed the
Right there.
the Bridgewater Triangle. In 2000,
You'll notice when we show the books on screen, you see the book that we're talking about in the forefront, and then a number of other books and publications all dealing with the Bridgewater Triangle lined up behind it. It kind of was a neat way to illustrate the number of publications that have been done about the Bridgewater Triangle and how much information there actually is out there.
open to the general public.
We recommend reading as many of them as you can. They're pretty interesting.
Region. None are more often seen or encountered than Bigfoot.
It's that famous sculpture, statue of Bigfoot at the Cryptozoology Museum. Everybody takes their pictures in front of that.
There was actually more articles about this, but there's a certain newspaper in Boston that was going to charge us a lot of money to use their articles, so we had to go with what we had.
There's a very large newspaper in Boston, which shall remain nameless, that wanted to charge us $3,000 or $2,000 per article for the film, and that was absolutely out of the question.
One of the screenings that we were at, we actually met the police officer's daughter that the Bigfoot picked up the back end of her father's car.
Yeah, we actually met her.
Wood will never forget
There's a nice young shot of Mr. Carlston Wood, who claims to have had an encounter with Bigfoot in the wintertime in the Hockomock Swamp, which you're seeing here. Carlston has done a lot of research in the paranormal, specifically in the Bridgewater Triangle region, and has a lot of unique stories to tell. But we thought that this one was the most interesting. When he and his friends saw the alleged Bigfoot in the swamp in the wintertime.
Yeah, he used to be an animal control officer, I believe.
Yeah, so
And
he's seen a lot of strange
Yeah.
things in that line of work, I'm sure. That was shot in probably early April, late March of 2013. Still needed some icy, wintry shots of the swamp when we were running out of time
in addition to the
before it all melted, so I had to get my ass out there and go film.
two small ponds in Bridgewater, known as Claybanks 1 and Claybanks 2. Bridgewater resident
There's the one name that'll pop up whenever you're researching the Bridgewater Triangle, Mr. Joseph DeAndrade. Allegedly saw Bigfoot in the winter of 1978 at Claybanks Pond, which we talk about in the film.
if you look in the background, I believe it's coming up. There's a splash
There
right
it was,
there.
yeah. There's a weird splash up
It's,
by it.
it's, I'm assuming it's a fish, but it's still kind of funny that it's there. Yeah, Joe was featured in a lot of articles from that newspaper in Boston that we couldn't use.
We actually did use one article from that newspaper in Boston. but it was an article that was published before 1923, so it is in the public domain, so they have no say over us using that article, which I like.
That's me.
That's Manny, yeah, that's Manny. Wearing the Bigfoot suit.
Never took an acting class in my life.
Did a good
And I
job.
was that good.
Very convincing.
Yeah.
Joe wearing his safari gear that he wears on his expeditions. The man has devoted his life to his sighting in the Bridgewater Triangle ever since that day. But unfortunately, he hasn't really seen anything since.
or BTET.
Started at maybe 5. It was me, Mike Foster, and then there was this other guy, Tony.
The BTET led
There's a
several expeditions
interesting picture of him with a very large gun
never again saw Bigfoot.
trekking through the swamps during one of his expeditions.
For a series of unsuccessful expeditions,
And here's another unique shot of him with that Aussie Outback hat.
DeAndre has since founded the Paranormal Investigation Organization.
Joe was writing pretty extensively about the Bridgewater Triangle at one point, sending out regular newsletters to subscribers.
Reviewed for many newspaper and magazine
And he's had his fair share of media appearances.
He has.
including segments on Fox 25 and
Like that.
Massachusetts.
We were fortunate enough to be featured on Chronicle.
That segment on Joe, I think, is the full, I think it's like the full half hour.
He alone was chronicling the reports, getting out there, investigating sightings firsthand.
Here's Pittman
expeditions are
analyzing Joe's sighting.
that the legends and lore that have grown up around the Hockomock Swamp.
Yeah, we were fortunate enough to be featured on an episode of Chronicle following the release of our film, which was quite an honor, and it generated quite a boost in interest in the project. And they were pretty nice up there.
Yeah, the clip made its way to YouTube and quickly gained over 16,000 views. There's a couple of them on there that are upwards 15,000, 16,000 views.
Yeah, the Jerry Lope Steve Frazier UFO sighting clip was posted by Chronicle. We allowed them to show that to promote our segment, and various UFO groups have re-uploaded that clip. It's up there dozens of times on YouTube.
That's me right there.
That's Manny
Yeah.
doing a this job
Yeah.
of rowing the canoe.
Never been in the water either. We actually met John Baker's daughter
Yeah.
on
What
another
was it, his
screening.
wife? Was it his daughter?
Actually, it was. I think it was his wife. You're right. That's me right there too. Again, never took an acting class.
That's Manny on screen. This is Scott Rebel rowing the canoe here, playing the part of John Baker. This is one of the best reenactments in the film, I think.
Scott's actually a firefighter down this way, not too far from there in Middleborough.
The voice is my best friend Ryan Lair, providing the reading of the quotes from the Herald article as the voice of John Baker, who has since passed away.
Gigantic raptors, sometimes
More illustrations from Brian.
spotted in the skies above the swamp and its surroundings.
This was a challenging segment to shoot because we didn't have a lot of visuals to go along with it other than the illustrations.
Claimed to have seen a
So it was just a matter of shooting the location of this alleged Thunderbird sighting.
nearby Mansfield.
And the witness talked about in the segment refuses to talk about his encounter. So we just had Lauren Coleman's testimony of the of his research of the occurrence, and then some illustrations. This one was done by John Gigg, who was another illustrator that we contracted for the film. He provided 3 illustrations, and that was one of them. That Mothman statue was at the Cryptozoology Museum in Maine. And there's a street where the alleged Thunderbird sighting took place. And actually was in Mansfield, which, when you get right down to it, is actually technically outside of the Bridgewater Triangle.
Yeah.
certainly ought to be down and placed in the middle of having an encounter.
Joe DeAndre writes in his book, a book that he wrote, a little pamphlet, that he saw 2 Thunderbirds fighting with one another.
Well, I don't know if that was him that saw that or if it was reported to him.
I mean, it might have been reported. I think it was over Lake Nippenicket.
I think the fighting Thunderbird story is one of those ones that you hear about, but you can never track down the source of.
In the Bridgewater Triangle, and I kept hearing
But we've had a lot of people tell us that they have seen large birds.
And this was the snake sighting that Coleman collected the story about. where it said that Depression-era workers were working out in the swamp and allegedly saw a snake the size of a stovepipe. This is another story that's difficult to get eyewitnesses for because it happened so long ago. We mentioned it briefly, and I think it was just a nice, effective depiction of the story.
That's when the CCC workers were clearing the lanes for the power lines. They saw it.
A series of sightings involving what Coleman does.
Here's the Mansfield Mystery Cat story. We cover this briefly in the film. This section of the film is kind of a rapid-fire depiction of some of the cryptic animal stories to come out of the Hockomock Swamp.
Presumed by some to be an escaped exotic pet.
There's another Bicknell illustration.
There were other
This is allegedly a tape recording, a videotape of this alleged cat. But it was difficult to track that down.
those interested me. Sometimes people would
In May of 1993,
And
the headless carcass of an
this serval was found. I'm willing to bet this was somebody's pet.
There was actually quite a few articles on this in the paper.
Yeah, this was an
I
interesting
found.
series of sightings that was going on. For those of you who know know a lot about animals and their habitats, you'll know that New England has been devoid of mountain lions for hundreds of years. So it was interesting that a lot of mountain lion reports were coming out of the area at the time.
Yeah, there was one in Rehoboth too that was loose.
And here's the Abington killer dog. It's an interesting story. The credibility of which is sometimes questioned on whether or not this actually happened or not.
Yeah, people were calling the police, but 911 wasn't invented back then, so there was no really tapes that were recorded.
If it is true, it's definitely one of the scariest stories to come out of the Bridgewater Triangle. This dog killing these two ponies.
And that's actually, that picture on the right there, that's actually a horse.
Dead ponies, yeah. It was a microfilm image, so it wasn't worth showing. Couldn't really see what it was.
There's another time lapse off of Elm Street in Bridgewater that I did.
This is, in my opinion, this was our ace in the hole for this film, this story that we're about to feature. With William Russo's creature sighting. It was the first time that anybody had featured his story on camera. Other than, the only other way to find out was to read his blog. But this was the first time he's told his story on camera. Bill Russo definitely comes across as one of the most genuine, honest people that you'll come across, and that's what makes his story so intriguing. I've said this many times in the various interviews that we've done for this film, but he just strikes me as the type of guy that could be anybody's grandfather. And his story is one of those ones that, people talk about after they see the film, and it's one of the stories that sticks with people, and it's one of the ones that they remember. What do you think, Manny?
His story's pretty believable.
That was one of my limited, not really a CGI or a special effects guy. Did my best to come up with the depiction of what a street lamp would look like lit up at night. Most of the quote-unquote night shots that you see in the film were day for night. We shot them during the day and color corrected for at night because we weren't in a position to be renting big HMI, moonlight balanced lights. So, we had to do our best to shoot day and then correct it to look for night. The John Baker Bigfoot report and that reenactment was shot in broad daylight, and I think it came out pretty good and looks pretty convincing at night.
Yeah.
She was just absolutely in terror. And suddenly I saw something wrong.
Another image of John Gig.
Yeah, this is the one that gets everybody's attention, this depiction that he did.
We actually sent him an email and sent him this clip, and I think he had this done in a few hours.
Yeah, but one of the things that we also did was we had him work directly with Bill Russo. So John Gigg was essentially working like a police sketch artist to come up with the most accurate depiction of what Bill Russo claims that he saw in Raynham that day. Or that night, I should say. This interview was shot outside of a cottage in Dennis on the Cape Cod that William owned. I went out there that day and shot this interview, and later I shot an interview that we used later in the film with Elizabeth Lyons. Those interviews were shot on the same day. It was the Cape Cod shooting day. It was a nice overcast day, which makes for the best conditions for shooting video. Get that nice evenly distributed light. Just had to cross my fingers and hope that it didn't rain that day. He just comes across like he absolutely saw what he thinks he saw.
Yeah.
I don't question him. I don't question his sincerity. Now, whether what he saw was something that can't be explained is, has yet to be determined. But I'm convinced that he thinks he saw whatever creature he claims he saw.
He actually told us that one of his friends that was in, I think, the Air Force saw the same thing.
Yeah, a guy lived down the street or something like that.
Yeah, but the guy wasn't at liberty to talk.
It was one of the many dolly shots featured in this film. We had a very cheap spreader dolly that ran on PVC pipe, and we used that extensively in the film. Excuse me. There's that street lamp again. That is the exact spot that he saw that creature. And we were talking about that newspaper in Boston that shall not be mentioned. Here's one of the public domain articles that we use from that newspaper. That they have no say in us using this, which I like.
Nope.
Her body was found a short distance from where we are right now. What's interesting and tragic at the same time is that finding the girl led to also discovering solitude.
There's a bunch of rocks in Massachusetts in the Bridgewater Triangle area that have inscriptions on them. There's a few that we didn't feature. There's one in East Bridgewater as well, but this is one in particular that we did feature. That was right next to where Jeff was.
Yeah, we were shooting Jeff's interview a few feet down the road from here. The voice reading that poem is actually my wife. We needed a female voice. We thought a female voice would be appropriate for that. My wife doesn't have any voice acting training or anything like that, but she was a vocalist at one point, singing in school, and I think she did a good job. Some nice shots of Lake Nippenicket. It's a very scenic little location in Bridgewater. We were shooting Chris Pittman, as Manny mentioned, at Lake Nippenicket. That interview was shot in front of the lake.
These individuals came to me and said that they'd actually seen a red-haired orangutan-like creature on the island of Lake Nippenicket. What they said happened.
A lot of people out enjoying the outdoors at the lake. A lot of people jet skiing, boating, canoeing, all that good stuff.
That wasn't Lou Ferrigno. That was me. The arm that you just saw.
Rowing the canoe.
Yeah.
Lake Nippenicket's pretty cool. If you go up to the northernmost point of it, you're actually heading into the Hockomock Swamp. So it's kind of where the land transitions from being a pond to the actual swamp. So it gets kind of dicey back there, but it's pretty cool to see. It's actually where we shot the John Baker Bigfoot reenactment, was in a remote corner tucked away in Lake Nippenicket. Managed to pile everything in the canoe, or some of the stuff in the canoe, and then another group of guys actually walked the pathways to get to this remote spot that we were shooting. Yeah, a nice family out enjoying a summer's day. These articles were all featured in the Brockton Enterprise. The Enterprise was gracious enough to allow us to use their articles in exchange for a credit in the film.
That's just a small number of articles about drownings in the Lake Nippenicket. There's actually a ton more that I had found. We couldn't feature all of them. There's a lot of them now.
One of the things that we did with regards to that newspaper up in Boston was a lot of the stories that they covered were also covered by the Brockton Enterprise. Different writers, different version of the story, but the same story. So we would just opt to go with the Brockton Enterprise article instead of the article from the paper that shall go unmentioned. And it was a good way around having to pay thousands of dollars to that other paper.
That was the second location you saw Jeff at that we had moved to off of Elm Street.
Yeah, after the guy started playing the drums.
Yeah.
James Rice was actually featured in that Chronicle episode that was done back in 2000 that also featured Joe DeAndre and Charles Turk Robinson.
Oh,
That you saw that picture on the wall in Joe DeAndre's office of him standing with the crew from Chronicle?
yeah.
That episode of Chronicle also featured James Rice, who was a young guy, so he was really, really young at that time. But he was gracious enough to agree to be in our film and told a few stories, but this is his spook light story. There's one of my limited After Effects capabilities right there.
It reminds me of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I think it's really good.
Thanks, dude. I had to mat out certain parts so that the reflection, like that rock in the lower left-hand corner, I had to mat that out so you don't see the reflection go on top of a rock, because you wouldn't see that. You would only see the reflection over the water.
It's raining that day that you filmed him. I was working. You filmed him. He's under a bridge.
Yeah, this was at some park in East Bridgewater.
No, West Bridgewater.
Oh, West Bridgewater. And it was pouring.
Yeah, War Memorial Park.
Animal encounters and spook light sightings in the Hockomock Swamp are well known to Bridgewater area residents. Adding to the mystique of the swamp are a number of lesser-known, one-of-a-kind reports.
Here's Elizabeth Lyons. I mentioned her story earlier. I shot this the same day that we interviewed Bill Russo. This was in her backyard. And here's some day for night shots in the Hockomock Swamp. It was shot in broad daylight and color corrected to look like nighttime.
The last stop was supposed to be the finale of it all. We were going down the path, and I looked about 15
This was a shot that day in May that we went up and down the pathways in the swamp. And we were looking for a location that would fit well with this reenactment. I forgot who actually saw this spot, but we decided to shoot it as a representation of what.
Actually, if
saw.
you turn around from where we are right now is where we shot the scene of Johnny walking. Yeah.
I called my best friend, who was also on the tour with me, Mary, and I said I saw something last night. And she's like, okay.
The friend that she refers to no longer lives in the area, so we were only able to get one side of this encounter story.
You know, I'll tell you what I saw. And she described
But Liz was very accommodating, went to her house and got to meet her son, and
the bluish green
he's actually does some acting and modeling, and
feeling that I had.
was learning a little bit about that, does some child modeling stuff. Here's another one of Manny's time lapses. These work really well to transition you from one part of the film to the other. So now we're starting to transition out of the swamp, and we're getting into the UFO sightings from throughout the Bridgewater Triangle. So we devote almost half an hour to stories from the Hockomock Swamp or around the Hockomock Swamp area.
Yeah.
In 1908, a well-documented UFO sighting occurred in
Another
Bridgewater.
public domain newspaper article.
Two carriage-riding undertakers
This is one of my favorite Bicknell illustrations. These two undertakers driving this carriage. It's one of those things that we didn't have the budget to reenact, but we wanted to give some sort of a visual for, and they saw this UFO above their carriage. And I thought Brian did a perfect job capturing the essence of that story. And we, threw in the horse and carriage sound effects, which seemed to give it a nice finishing touch. Helps your imagination kind of take over.
be the most active period of documented UFO sightings in the history of the Bridgewater Triangle region. A number of news outlets
Coming up is another one of those really credible stories to come out of the Bridgewater Triangle area.
WHDH reporters Jerry
The UFO section of this film is actually pretty strong. I mean, we feature a number of eyewitness accounts to odd occurrences in the sky.
Yeah, these were featured on Chronicle as well. These actually can be found all over the internet.
This can be seen on Chronicle's website, and actually the first 10 minutes of the movie
Yeah.
can be seen on the first 10 minutes of the Hockomock Swamp section of the movie can be seen on Chronicle.
We pulled his vehicle over, and all of a sudden the stars blotted out in the shape of...
People have told us they have seen this craft before in the past. I wouldn't say recently, but people have seen this exact same thing.
This story is interesting just because there were so many people in the spring of 1979 that were corroborating the same reports of the same craft in the sky. And these are more Brian Bicknell drawings. And this is where you start to see that technique that we used of showing a still frame of video of where the encounter took place and then having Brian draw his own rendition based on that frame of video, and then we would dissolve from one to the other. We got a lot of compliments from people on that technique. You know, for a low-budget film that didn't have a lot in its budget for major reenactments, it was a good, interesting way to depict these things without actually filming a reenactment. Sprazier and Lopes, while we're on this section, we were fortunate to get these interviews because neither one of these gentlemen live in the area anymore. Steve, I believe, lives in North Carolina, and Jerry lives in Pittsburgh. Steve had been visiting his parents in Duxbury, Mass., and he was super accommodating. He called me up and said, "Hey, I'm going to be in Duxbury. You want to shoot an interview with me about my encounter?" Because we'd asked him. And I said, "Absolutely, I'll meet you in Duxbury." So I drove up to Duxbury and was lucky enough to get him, and then later on found out that Jerry was planning a trip to Martha's Vineyard with his wife and was landing in Providence and then was going to be driving out to the Cape. So I live right off of Route 195 that leads out to Cape Cod, so we drove from Rhode Island to Cape Cod and passed right by my house. And he was nice enough to stop, and we shot that interview in my garage.
That article actually took me a couple weeks to find because we had to find the date.
We feature that article extensively in this film. The artist rendition in that article is a great representation of what these people were seeing at the time. And it's funny how closely it resembles that little model that Steve was showing in his hands. This picture was funny tracking down the rights to. It was a prom photo of Ron Baker from the 70s, and we actually found the guy who snapped that photo, who was happy enough to sign over a release to let us use it, and he kind of chuckled. And who would think that you'd snap a picture in the late 70s of a guy at a prom and then it would wind up in a documentary?
That location where Ron is actually the same location where we shot Joe Murray. It's just the other side of the room.
Also, we actually shot 3 interviews there because we shot Mike Markowitz there as well.
Yeah. Yep.
So we have here another report of that same UFO being seen, and this was also, Ron Baker claims to have seen this UFO in 1979. So, like we said, there was a number of reports coming out of the area. I like that interview with Ron. It features a bunch of names of different towns in the area on the wall behind him. It kind of was a neat little local touch.
There would be leads for other sightings. On one occasion, I was pulled over by a police officer who asked me what I was doing, and I told him honestly, I'm here to investigate UFO sightings. He immediately knew what I was talking about.
This is one of those day for night shots down by the Taunton River. Very hot that day. I remember going to shoot that. A lot of this B-roll was shot in the heat of the summer. You know, go shooting at these locations. Sometimes in the thick brush of the woods, and Manny would go trekking through there with shorts and flip-flops with prickers and briars and get stuck. Here's Derek Holt's UFO encounter, which he had video footage of. He's seen these craft multiple times, and he has video footage of them from different locations.
He runs a DJ service, DJ Holty, I believe.
So he bought a video camera with the intention of trying to capture these orbs that he kept seeing. They're pretty interesting. When you zoom in up close on them, it's easy enough to say that they're a plane, but when he zoomed out all the way, you can see just how far away they are and that they don't really move much in the sky. I mean, he zoomed in at maximum distance to capture this. This is why it's so shaky. If you ever try to film something zoomed in as close as you can get, it's hard to keep the camera still. And then you can see that thing is just sitting in the sky. It's got these two lights on the side of it. Now, you would think if it were a plane, it would be moving to the left or moving to the right, and it's just staying in that one spot. So it is kind of an interesting thing that he saw in the sky. So he just sits there like a dot.
I still, to this day, know I seen something that wasn't true as well.
Here's another time lapse, a series of time lapses as we transition out of UFOs now into the Native American legend section of the film.
That first time lapse, Grassy Island was in that shot. That's where I shot that.
This was a place that was perhaps the most densely populated.
So here we get into a number of UFO, Native American aspects to the Bridgewater Triangle. Not necessarily paranormal, just mysterious. And I think that's, the Bridgewater Triangle involves a lot of mystery and odd occurrences, not necessarily of a paranormal nature.
Psychology professor Edmund Delabar led an archaeological expedition to an area along the banks of the Taunton River in Berkley. There, the team discovered
Here's a shot of Grassy Island, actually from the Dighton Rock Museum. The two locations are right next to each other. And as we talk about in the film, although you read in a lot of publications that Grassy Island is in the Hockomock Swamp, it's not anywhere close to there. It's across the river from Dighton Rock, which is about 20 miles south of the Hockomock Swamp.
Revealing that even they, in their discoveries, were talking in sinister terms.
This part's funny coming up. We're talking about red ochre. No idea what to show here. So I actually bought some red ochre on eBay. And just spread it out on that same set that we were using to film the books. And just got some nice, tight, critical focus shots of this red ochre that I purchased, just to give a visual reference of what we're talking about.
some sources also claim that photographs of the excavation failed to develop.
The story of the
It's a nice spot in Dighton Rock State Park, and it's actually located exclusively in Berkley. Dighton's actually on the other side of the river from Berkley. This is the Taunton River that you're seeing here. Taunton River is a major river in southeastern Massachusetts that flows out to the Atlantic Ocean. It actually runs through the city of Fall River. Battleship Cove is a pretty well-known location on the Taunton River. Fall River, of course, is known for the Lizzie Borden murders. And depending on who you talk to, Fall River is often included as a location in the Bridgewater Triangle. Even though technically, if you draw the lines and stick to the traditional lines, it's outside of the Bridgewater Triangle.
Lower portion of the Bridgewater Triangle, 12 miles to the southwest of the Hockomock.
And you can see the Taunton River.
Across the river from Grassy Island in Berkley,
Here's a little Dighton Rock
which houses what is
Museum,
known as Dighton Rock.
thanks to the Massachusetts Department of Recreation, whatever it's called, DCM, or DCR or whatever. Conservation Recreation, DCR, they allowed us to go in and shoot the Dighton Rock Museum for a little modest fee. We were able to do that. Museum's a really neat place to go. Unfortunately, they're very short-staffed, so all the times you have to call ahead and say you want to get in to the museum. Listening to Derek Gunn. His website is amazingmassachusetts.com. And he is a guru on all the different archaeological and geological mysteries of not only the Bridgewater Triangle, but throughout the Northeast. If there's a strange rock or inscription somewhere, it's a good chance that Derek Gunn knows a lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think also, though, Native Americans certainly noticed this special rock that seemed to have special powers.
You can see some what looks like ancient graffiti on that rock, but then you can see someone who carved modern letters right into it as well. Some people that were defacing the rock while it was still in the Taunton River. Now it's safely protected in a climate-controlled building.
Unsolved mysteries that drive this crazy, and Dighton Rock is just another one of those.
See up near the top of the screen there. It's like J-E-S-E, Jesse maybe, something like that.
Not far from Dighton Rock, in the Assonet Village section of the Freetown Fall River State Forest, Levittown, Massachusetts, is a glacial rock formation with an unusual feature. If one stands on the nearby observation area, they can clearly see the profile of a man protruding from the rock.
Here's profile rock.
That this silhouette is the face of an
I think it looks even more like a profile than the old man on the mountain in New Hampshire did.
site to local Wampanoag Indians.
That's the most convincing, naturally occurring face I've ever seen on a rock.
Yeah.
In the town of Abington, we had Lady Abington.
We can't find much about this Lady Abington. Just going by what Derek Gunn said and provided, but that was, according to him, it was a profile rock in Abington, which was destroyed when they built a highway or a road. I would think if you had a naturally occurring rock formation like that, you'd do your best to not destroy it and maybe build the road around
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
it's kind of too bad if that's the case, if that really was destroyed by road building.
For the death of the Wampanoag chief Metacommon in the closing days of King Philip's War.
This is a pretty interesting aspect of the Bridgewater Triangle, this whole Anawan Rock situation.
Involved mopping up native resistance in the area.
The event that you're going to see in a little while was filmed actually in the Freetown State Forest, and was an interview that wasn't supposed to happen with Chris Balzano. He had locked his keys in his car because he was supposed to go do a book signing in Dartmouth after doing this tour in the Freetown State Forest, which I had filmed his tour, but was never supposed to interview him because there just wasn't time. But once he locked his keys in his car and we were waiting for AAA, we had about 2 hours to kill, so we were able to interview him, and that's when this odd occurrence, which you're about to see, took place. There's Andrew Lake, his book, Ghost Hunting Southern New England. Andrew's got a good voice, very bassy, narrating
Yeah,
tone to
it's
it.
deep.
Numerous investigations at Anawan Rock. People visiting the rock have heard the sound
Andrew lectures frequently about ghosts and the paranormal, and I wouldn't mind sitting through a lecture with him. He's got a good voice for it. It's not it's easy to listen to his voice. It's not a shrill, nagging voice or anything like that. This interview was shot at the, where was that shot?
It was a library in Rehoboth.
I forgot the name of it.
Yeah.
Blanding Public Library?
I think it was the Blanding Public Library. That was your backyard right there, wasn't it?
Yeah, I shot that campfire in my backyard. That was one of the last things we shot for the film. There's a backside of Anawan Rock. It's got this very dramatic rock formation.
Whaling City Ghosts founder Luann Jolly has been drawn to the paranormal from a very young age. In 2012, she published Dead Whispers.
You can see all the books lined up there that I was talking about before. We would kind of, for each different book that we show, we change the order of the ones in the back, and you'd see different ones brought in and out, and just to reinforce the wide array that you see that are out there about books of the Bridgewater Triangle.
One of the greatest
Now, this interview was shot at Profile Rock. You could see Profile Rock in the background over Luann's shoulder, kind of slightly out of focus. Well, actually pretty significantly out of focus.
As I turned around, I met the eyes of an older
That was an illustration by John Geig, I believe, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
John Gig did
Yeah.
this illustration as
Yeah.
well, which we modified to look. I mean, if you see the original illustration, it looks a lot different from what we show on the screen here. That was kind of tinkered with in After Effects to give it kind of a ghostly appearance.
I suddenly realized, oh my God,
But he did a good job on that one. Told him I needed a 17th century Native American from the Northeast and gave him some references of things to look at. Came up with that in no time at all.
It's an honor to meet the spirit of the man who experienced
It's great working with these illustrators. They did invaluable work for us with this film. If it wasn't for them, it probably wouldn't have been possible. Especially to depict some of the things that we wanted to depict without reenacting.
okay if they just surrendered and went to Plymouth. And no, Benjamin Church left for a few days, came back, and by then it was too late. And Warren's head was on a pike for 20 years.
At Anawan Rock, aside from the
Now here's that instance I was talking about with Balzano. You can see we're just shooting out in the middle of the woods with a makeshift lighting setup. Andrew Lake happened to be there that day, and he provided a battery-operated light that we could use to shoot this interview. So you'll see here what happens I think most people pick up on it when they see the film. I think some people see this section of the film and they wonder what the hell's going on. And it takes them a minute to figure out what actually happened.
Yeah.
This is the closest thing I've experienced to a paranormal occurrence. Bam, light goes out. Right there. Get everything back up and running. And Chris finds out that he was talking about the wampum belt when the light shut off. Now watch, he goes to taunt the spirits. And then the light will shut off again. Boom. Yeah, even as a major skeptic, the hair on my arm was standing up on that October evening in 2009.
Another time lapse that I did.
I think this is one of Manny's favorite parts of the film coming up here. Kind of got a closer personal connection to it just for the people that were featured.
He was described as looking kind of like a farmer, wearing denims, a flannel shirt, and most descriptions of him.
The red-headed hitchhiker is played by a kid by the name of Stephen Ramsey, who is a team manager for a skateboard company called All I Need Skateboards, who is the company's owned by professional skateboarder Anthony Shetler, who was a amateur skateboarder for the company Zoo York and is now a pro for his own company, which he runs allineedskateboards.com.
They were super accommodating and very nice, both Ramsey and Anthony Shetler. Super fun to work with, super laid back.
That's my niece in the passenger seat, and there's a friend of mine, Chris Grazioso. He's a supervisor, a paramedic supervisor for a company here in Massachusetts called Fallon Ambulance. He's been there since 1988. He's also a pilot as well.
This is one of the first injections of humor into the film. Not that it, there's things you might find humorous here and there, but this was, legitimately one of the funniest parts of the film, where each of these guys is talking about the accounts of who's seen the hitchhiker and who hasn't, where it's always like my cousin's sister's roommate's best friend's boyfriend saw it. This is funny. This illustration by John Gigg, the car that he uses there looks to me like a 1989 Toyota Camry, which was the first car that I ever owned. It was my mother's car. It was a hand-me-down. It was my first car. I have a soft spot in my heart for the Camry. So every time I see that illustration, I think of my old car, which when I finally traded it in, it had like 210,000 miles on it, and I got it on the trade. They gave me $400 for it on the trade.
There's a girl that I work with, and her husband is a tow truck driver, and he actually did see what he claims to be the red-headed hitchhiker, but it wasn't on Route 44. It was on Route 152 in Rehoboth. He told me that he saw it. Same description. This was about a year ago. So
maybe he moved.
I know.
Maybe he got a ride to this next street over or
maybe
something like that.
they brought him up the street and they dropped him off.
Where is this, Manny? Where's this time lapse?
That's in Rehoboth.
Yeah, but where?
I believe that's a historic spot in Rehoboth. Let me see if I can get the name of that. I'm trying to remember.
Is it a bridge?
It is. It is.
I mean, obviously it's a bridge, but
It's
you know
a
the name of it?
I'll get the name of it.
Some historic homes in Rehoboth. Rehoboth's a very scenic town to drive through. If you got some time to kill on a Sunday or whatever, I mean, you can drive around Rehoboth and find probably like an ice cream place to stop or something. It's a perfect town for that kind of a thing. Sleepy, New England town, very rural, very scenic.
Well, there it is. That was the Carpenter Street Bridge. I knew.
Here's a rapid-fire series of video frame to illustration transitional shots that we did with Brian Bicknell's illustrations. He's worked out really, really well, I think. This part of the film, Andrew Lake carries this section of the film. There's no narration, no other contributions from anybody else, but Andrew Lake, I think, is engaging enough that he does a good job of carrying this next 4 to 5 minutes of the film. This was all sweltering hot weather that we went around to shoot these Rehoboth scenes in this past summer, summer of 2013, leading into the premiere of the film. These are some of the last things that we had to button up. These cemetery shots in Rehoboth. This is the only part of this section of the film that features anything other than Andrew's voice. We feature a couple of UFOs that were allegedly recorded in these locations in Rehoboth. This one, Brianne Hantzis was nice enough to provide us. Now, what it actually is, I can't say. If that's an EVP or if it's just a little kid yelling in the background. I don't know.
It sounds like it.
Sounds like kids playing in
Yeah.
the yard or something like that, but she claims there was no ambient sound. Here's one from Mike Markowitz. It's a little more subtle than the first one. It's pretty interesting. I'm a pretty big skeptic when it comes to EVPs. I'm of the opinion that if a ghost wants to communicate something to you, why doesn't it just say, "Hi, I'm John the Ghost. I was struck and killed by a car at this location in 1936." Like, why is it always like this cryptic, like, "I killed the children," or "Get out," or it's never just like, regular conversation. I mean, if they have the power to throw an EVP your way, why don't they just get to the point?
Another effect done by you that came out good.
Yeah, some of those balls of light effects were pretty challenging to do, especially for someone who doesn't consider themselves a... There's another fire that was shot in my backyard. The spook light special effects were pretty challenging. Here's the Hornbein School. The neighbors were watching us that day. Somebody was outside watching us film this. We didn't know if they were maybe going to call the police on us or something like that at the Hornbein School.
It says open Sunday. I believe it's open the third Sunday. The third Sunday of every month, I believe.
It's a neat little... I was expecting something different. I'd never been there before.
Yeah.
It was kind of cool to see it. So many stories attached to it. This is one of the things we joke about with Brian Bicknell is the school mom has a massive rack.
That's why all the kids are staring.
He does comic book illustrations regularly, and if you've seen comic books, the women are usually well endowed with large bosoms, and so that kind of carried over into his school mom. But who's to say that the school mom didn't have
That's right.
large breasts?
22 miles to the northeast of Rehoboth sits the town of East Bridgewater. Much like Rehoboth, East Bridgewater contains a...
It's kind of a neat little section of the film here when we briefly touch on some of the hauntings in East Bridgewater. Seems like East Bridgewater and Rehoboth produce the most ghost stories of any towns in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Yeah, East Bridgewater does have a lot of places. We couldn't feature them all because it would have taken too long, but the town hall is said to be haunted. Various other places too, but this cable show that Ann did features a lot of them too. I believe a lot of the clips can be found on YouTube. That was the forts up in Hull, Massachusetts, where they just were.
Interesting investigations that I've done with my group, East Bridgewater So Haunted, was a house on North
They say this is a historic home. It looks like a new home since they've done the renovations to it. This one on North Central Street.
While we were in there, one of the investigators was upstairs, and Kerrigan.
There's that antique store again.
Yep, there's the third interview shot at that location. Makes for an interesting backdrop. If you can drop it out of focus in the background, you get all sorts of interesting things happening. Aesthetically, though, this interview with Ann Kerrigan in front of that cemetery is my favorite interview in the film. I just think it just looks so neat. You know, we kind of shot it late in the afternoon during the magic hour where you get that nice lighting. And then we just color corrected it. Really made her eyes pop. And just aesthetically speaking, it's definitely my favorite interview in the film. What's your favorite interview, Manny, aesthetically speaking?
Of this
In this film?
entire film? Well, I like Bill Russo's story.
Just for the look of the interview?
Yeah. And I like to hear what Alan has to say.
Yeah, but I'm talking just in terms of how it looks. What's your favorite one?
Probably the second location where we took Jeff.
Yeah, that's a good looking interview. There's a moon time lapse.
I think that was done by you.
Yeah, that's the only time lapse in the movie that I did. The rest were all Manny. Did a good job with the GoPro.
That was a good one, though. The moon.
That was shot the same night I was shooting those campfires in my yard. Copacut Road, man. We drove the length of that in my FJ. And let me tell you, that is some serious off-roading, especially for somebody that doesn't have a lot of experience off-roading.
Yeah, don't ever attempt it in a car. There's no way.
No way. You need a pickup truck or an SUV to even attempt it. We bought him down my FJ. I thought I broke it, but it was fine.
This scene's interesting because as we were shooting it, a pickup truck did come out of the woods with a big light rack on it and bright headlights, and we thought it was somebody that we knew, but it actually was
some Freetown hillbilly.
Yeah, coming out of the woods in a pickup truck with the light rack and everything. Another time lapse.
Yeah, that's one of the nicest time lapses in the movie. They're all good, but that one's particularly creepy.
Here we are recording again.
Yeah, we had a mysterious shutting off of the camera during recording the commentary when the Freetown State Forest section started, so we're picking up where we left off. As a skeptic, when it comes to the paranormal, I must say that this is my favorite part of the film. A lot of this true crime stuff that you can actually prove happened.
But unlike other locations within the Bridgewater Triangle, the Freetown State Forest has seen a disproportionate amount of criminal activity. Some paranormal researchers...
Some footage from a tour that was shot back in 2009 with Chris Balzano. He had already moved to Florida, so I jumped at the opportunity to film him in the Freetown State Forest, not knowing when he would be back in the area again.
Caused by the triangle, or whether or not the triangle is the result of whatever predates that. It's not a surprise to me that all this crime takes place here because it's just a darker place.
We were really deep in when we got those shots.
Yeah, there's a lot of really remote sections of that forest. That's for sure.
During the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, rumors of a satanic cult operating within the forest spread fear throughout the local community. Evidence of gruesome animals...
These pictures all came from Alan Alves, who comes up in this section of the film. He provided all these crime scene photos, crime scene videos that he collected while he was on the Freetown Police Department. So, you know, Alves, this whole Freetown section of the film is pretty much carried by Alan Alves and Chris Balzano. You get a little bit of John Brightman mixed in there, but Alves and Balzano in particular carried this section of the film. The whole tone of the movie changes at this part, Freetown State Forest. I mean, the paranormal is spooky in and of itself, but the true crime and the nature of the crimes committed in the Freetown State Forest really is a really chilling part of the movie. The whole tone really changes.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely does.
These are all pictures provided by Alves of some really, really strange stuff. That interview there was shot in Alan's basement in front of his gas fireplace. That day that we shot this shot right here was one of the hottest days that we had shooting. Remember that day we drove out into the Freetown State Forest?
Yeah.
It was like 100 degrees. That's a really nice shot of the city of Fall River across the Taunton River, too.
We were kicked out earlier from a previous spot trying to shoot that.
Yeah,
bridge.
that shot from across the Taunton River, we didn't realize we were on private property. This Portuguese lady come out of her house and kicked us out.
Bleachers at Diamond Vocational High School in Fall River. Levesque's hands had been tied behind her back, and her skull had been crushed. The crime scene included evidence of sexual abuse and ritual.
This is a really bizarre case, this whole Carl Drew Robin Murphy situation. We kind of give a synopsis of the case here in the film. We don't get into too much detail with it, but it's a subject that by itself could make for a whole separate documentary.
It's the former site, so you can see that those houses in the back are new, fairly new. Those ones off to the left. It must have been all woods.
A lot of these articles here in this part of the film came from the Fall River Herald. They were gracious enough to allow us to use those articles in exchange for a film credit.
In November of 1979, law enforcement
We show the City of Fall River Police Department in this part of the film, but that wasn't where the police department was back in the 70s and early 80s, but we had no other alternative but to shoot the current building, just to give some sort of a visual on that.
satanic ritual in a Fall River apartment.
And that's actually not the apartment building that these alleged rituals took place in. That one has since been demolished, and that one stands in its place.
Robin Murphy and 25-year-old pimp Carl Drew were leading followers in bizarre satanic rites. Eventually, Kerry interviewed another local prostitute, Karen Marsden.
Talks about, you know, the seedy underbelly of Fall River, which, if you're from southeastern Mass, you know anything about the surrounding cities. Fall River and New Bedford in particular are pretty rough towns. You had three pretty high-profile cases that all routinely get confused with one another. You had the Carl Drew Robin Murphy satanic ritual murders in Fall River. You had the highway murders in New Bedford, which took place 10 years later. And you had the James Cater, Mary Lou Aruda case, which we discussed later in the film, that took place in the Freetown State Forest. And people that aren't too familiar with any one of those cases, they always get confused with one another, and names get cross-referenced and put in the wrong place. But those are actually three separate, unrelated cases.
He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Condemned by mainstream satanic religious organizations like the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set, ritual sacrifice and criminal deeds in the name of Satan remain controversial subjects. Nevertheless, self-stylized Satanists
Some really weird pictures of animal sacrifice that
committing crimes in the name
Alves had obtained through his investigations in the Freetown State Forest.
after the arrests and convictions.
I don't think there's been a lot of discovery of that kind of thing since the 90s. I think things have kind of cooled off a little bit in the Freetown.
That stone pentagram, Johnny and I met a cranberry bog worker that had found that and called Alan Alves. And he told us that he had thrown the rocks. He took it apart, threw the rocks in the woods. Following day, he came back and it was built again. And it was almost like the rocks were in the exact same spots that they were before he destroyed it.
The those grave robberies that you saw pictures of, we spent a whole summer's day out in the Freetown State Forest trying to find those locations. We had John Brightman with us, we had Alan Alves with us. It's probably about 90 degrees in the heat, trekking around in the woods, and we were unsuccessful in finding those graves. And Manny was out there wearing shorts and flip-flops once again.
I think when you were out there, I think Alan said he thinks that the gravestones were removed. So,
Well, that would make them very difficult to
yeah,
find
that
if
would be
that's the
hard.
case.
Yeah.
This is a pretty gruesome story. These teenage youth breaking into the mausoleum in the Sonnet Village Cemetery, cutting the head off of a corpse, and trying to take the head. And you say kids being kids, but that's a little extreme. Not many people can say that as a kid they broke into a mausoleum and tried to steal the head off a corpse. It's pretty disturbing. You see a shot here of the police report. And you saw a shot of the actual skull. And once again, there's the corpse without its head, and there's the skull. It's probably one of the more gruesome series of pictures you're going to see in this film.
People were coming here to check it and see what was going on. They decided to take off the metal gate door and actually brick it in so nobody could break into it ever again.
There's Manny riding in the passenger seat holding the tracks for our dolly.
Yeah, I remember falling into one of the shallow graves here. It was covered over with grass, so I couldn't see it. It was pretty funny.
It's very bizarre. You got this pet cemetery that was just abandoned out in the middle of the Freetown State Forest, and just the fact that there was a pet cemetery out in this remote section of the forest that wasn't easily accessible by any means, it's just bizarre. You know, it's like, let's go visit Fluffy's grave, and it's like a 15-minute trek into the Freetown State Forest.
It's in the middle
dirt
of
roads, and
nowhere.
yeah, it's so weird.
Two sites in particular have the imaginations of local residents. Swirling with rumors of childhood.
This article was obtained through the Boston Herald. We used 2 articles from the Boston Herald, and we did have to pay for the use of these articles, but not nearly as much as that other big newspaper wanted from Boston. We won't mention it by name, but they wanted a few $1,000s per image. So we said, thanks, but no thanks. Here's the infamous underground bunker, and we were successful in finding that location thanks to Mike Fournier, Freetown resident, a friend of Manny.
Now, in that picture where you saw the barrel, you see it again in the shot where we found it.
No sign of that
Let's
little
see.
chair when we were there. I think that's long since rotted away.
It was very clear that whatever was working there was kind of connecting some kind of child abuse and perhaps child abduction.
Really creepy concept. Someone took the time to actually build an underground bunker deep in the woods. Alan Alves, actually, we shot 2 interviews with him in the same location. Realized that we still had a few questions that we needed to ask him. So you can see the difference aesthetically. Both interviews look a little different. He's talked about the hut. And once again, we were able to find where the hut once stood. There's not much left. Not even much to talk about.
Yeah, we went down there, and Johnny and I found it, and Johnny actually found it. We were standing in front of it. We didn't realize it. And then when you and I went down there, since I had sandals on, I stayed in one spot. You went forward more in the woods, and I didn't realize, but I was standing right in front of it.
Here's one of the more interesting shots in the film. You would think that's the Hockomock Swamp, but in reality that's a swamp in the Freetown State Forest, which we were able to get some B-roll of. Hey, you see a time-lapse showing the the underground bunker before and after.
I remember walking in and seeing a big pentagram on the floor.
Here's Mike.
And then 2 cots with a big fire pit right in the middle. It doesn't really look the same anymore, but this is definitely the spot.
Hidden away off on
There's that barrel again.
the Freetown portion of the state
It's still there.
Without question, it's definitely the same location.
bunker are still covered with faint traces of satanic graffiti. Shortly after finding the underground bunker, the filmmakers confirmed an approximate whereabouts of the infamous makeshift hut.
A lot of weird stories attached to this hut location. And we do talk about how it's often referred to as Carl Drew's shack. But, there's no definitive proof linking that Fall River cult to the hut. It was all speculation and hearsay. We make sure to clarify that in the film.
Paranormal researchers, ghost tour patrons, and curious
That is
investigators have found numerous abandoned hunting cabins.
Heidi and Barton Smith once again, shown investigating the Freetown State Forest. They were gracious enough to agree to have their likeness shown in the film.
The areas in question help to resolve any
There's Mike again looking around. We actually found a big wolf spider when we were in there. There's some images from the Massachusetts State Police. They're also from the
definitive link to the
book Mortal Remains.
Yeah, they were featured in that book as well. This was that same day where it was really, really hot. Just every time I look at it, I just think about how hot it was. It was insanely hot that day.
Yeah, we were way out.
war within the traditional borders
Yeah, another adventure in the FJ Cruiser out into the depths of the Freetown State Forest.
Just bring the dogs in and go around and see if we can find the remains.
Those trees are fantastic. They just make for some really interesting shots.
Do that with the dog, and then at the last minute, Powers would be cancel the operation.
The majority of the cults that find their way here to the
So by canceling the operation, it really makes you wonder what could be out there.
Yeah, I always
You
thought
never
that
know.
was a strange thing that he said. Unfortunately, he didn't elaborate too much on it.
the more likely that they are involved in
That they canceled the operation.
Despite a lack of evidence for crimes involving human sacrifice in the Freetown State Forest, evidence of animal sacrifice was routinely
This is
discovered throughout the
another part of the film where it gets kind of heavy and gruesome.
what began in the forest as
Talks about a lot of the animal sacrifice that was happening in the Freetown State Forest.
until finally there were cow carcasses being found here.
In 1999, a dozen baby calves were
This
slaughtered.
footage was provided by Alan Al, so that's the actual footage that you're seeing of these mutilated baby cattle, which is really, really weird. Some nice maggots there.
Signals to people like Alan Al
You can see them squirming around.
Oh, it's gross.
that perhaps more organized
Definitely the most gruesome thing you'll see in this film right here.
The cattle mutilations of the late 1990s marked the last known instance of satanic ritual sacrifice.
Really, really bizarre.
State Forest.
Another time lapse that was done with the GoPro.
Although satanic-related crimes and activity often dominate headlines,
Here's a subject matter that gets really heavy here.
the area is
Talks about the unfortunate situation with the
not occurrence.
murder of 15-year-old Raynham resident Mary Lou Arruda, who was found tied to a tree in
Raynham resident
in the Freetown State Forest. She was murdered.
tree in the forest.
Mary Lou Arruda was on her bicycle on a dirt road in Raynham, and she was knocked off her bike and kidnapped. Brought
Really a sad situation. This was a very, very high-profile case at the time.
her body was found 2 months later in November of '78 by 2 dirt bike riders. They said we found the defendant's body tied to a tree. It was like a week after Halloween, so I figured it must be a dummy. And they brought me to the area. They wouldn't go near it. They went up there, and I walked up the hill, and sure enough, it was the defendant's body being tied to the tree.
Eventually, 32-year-old James Gator was
For that section of the movie, we did obtain the crime scene photos, but we decided not to use them.
Yeah, there was no
They were
question
too gruesome.
about using those. It was not necessary to get the point across, and
Yeah,
would have been very much over the top.
we covered it enough.
Her body was found in some of that activity.
His defense attorney basically put forth the theory that a cult had killed Russo and not him. This kind of led to an attaching that he was
We went through kind of a circus to get the photos of James Cater.
Testified that case.
Before we knew that the Standard Times had photos of him, we tried to negotiate with the Associated Press, and they wanted an absurd amount of money for the photo that they took of him. So we contacted the Standard Times, who was great to work with throughout this whole process, and they said, "Oh yeah, absolutely." And they provided photographs that we could
Yeah.
use.
2 men were found shot to death in a car on Bell Rock Road in the same region. In 2006, multiple strange
These are just some of the stories. There's many more stories.
Yeah, a lot of weird,
Yeah.
a lot of weird stuff. I mean, I as a kid growing up in Dartmouth, I never heard of the Bridgewater Triangle, but I definitely heard of the Freetown State Forest. I grew up about 6 miles down the road from the Freetown State Forest, and you know, even as a kid, you heard all sorts of wacky stories, and everybody knew it for its reputation for ritual sacrifice and ritual activity and all sorts of weird stuff and bizarre stories of animals and whatnot. It's like bore into the psyche of everybody that lived in the area.
associated with Wampanoag folklore.
Pukwudgie were mischievous and caused the Wampanoag trouble. And everything that went wrong
It's like a national obsession right now with Pukwudgies.
colonialization of the country.
And it's one of the more popular subjects regarding the Bridgewater Triangle right now.
And then somewhere in the Wampanoag
Yeah, we do get asked that quite a bit.
Yeah, we get asked about Pukwudgies a lot, and it's not my favorite topic regarding the Bridgewater Triangle, but it's a very popular subject.
talked about foot soldiers of the devil.
Humanistic in their features,
These were illustrations done by Brian Bicknell of the Pukwudgies. I think he did a really good job capturing the essence of what these creatures are supposed to look like.
and the ability to glow in
He was great. You just tell him what you needed, and he would turn it around in no time, and it was always an interesting depiction.
There's actually a children's book, too, called The Good Giants and the Bad Pukwudgies by Gene Fritz. Talks about Pukwudgies. Has some illustrations in it, too.
Pukwudgie sightings in the Freetown State Forest share striking similarities with William Russo's unexplained creature encounter. Christopher Balzano's book Dark Woods features...
Balzano's book features a lot of interesting eyewitness accounts regarding Pukwudgies. The names of the witnesses were changed in his book to protect their identity. So the woman Joan is probably not Joan. She's probably something else, but she still reported her story to Balzano, and it was very similar to William Russo's story, in that they were both walking their dogs when they had their encounters. Coming up here is a very, very well-known piece of footage. It's got about 50,000 views on YouTube under the name When Pukwudgies Attack. And it was captured while shooting footage for that book that you just saw, book and DVD combo. This is one of those pieces, you know, we felt it was important to show. You know, we weren't making a judgment on it, but personally I have my doubts as to whether this woman was actually possessed or not. This occurred near the ledge in the Freetown State Forest. It sounds like they were on the rocks that are right near the water at the bottom.
It also sounds, you can almost hear like an Indian.
Yeah, that's been brought up a few times. You hear this voice in the background kind of yell out, and
It's
everyone
coming up. There it
you
is,
can
right
hear it in the
there.
background.
Yeah, right there.
But everybody that was there said that there were people up on the top of the ledge at the same time that were yelling down to them. So it's not a Native American chant or anything like that. So if you hear somebody tell you that, they're stretching the truth, because it was just people that were up on the top of the ledge.
There's nothing in the background either. There's no images of demons or anything.
No,
or
no, yeah. If you
Pukwudgies
see a special on TV saying that there was the face of a Pukwudgie in the footage, that's a lie. That never happened. Borrowed my friend's jib crane to get some of these neat shots at the ledge.
I was walking out onto the ledge, and I saw this woman in white standing out on the promenade. And I turned around to the people I was with.
Matt Moniz's appearance in the film.
Turned around.
He's all over the place with the paranormal. He's at all the conventions. He's on all the shows. He's on Spooky South Coast, 30-odd minutes.
Running over to the edge to look
He helps out a bunch of different groups when they go out to do their investigations.
lived here all their life. Like,
He makes his rounds, that's for sure.
Yeah, he
He's a
definitely
good guy,
does.
too. He's very gracious about agreeing to appear in the film.
committed suicide because her lover was supposed to meet her.
He's good friends with Andrew Lake.
Makes for a really good backstory. We don't know whether the backstory is true, and it probably isn't, but it doesn't discount the fact that she's seen him.
Paranormal researchers routinely debate the validity of
Here's the wrap-up, where everybody kind of gives their 2 cents about the Bridgewater Triangle.
Made for a nice, tidy triangle based on his research. But in the years since, the more people have talked about the Bridgewater Triangle and the more that they've shared stories and experiences, we've seen that the triangle has to expand. To me,
Talked to most of these researchers, and they feel that the boundaries of the triangle are kind of a fluid thing, where it's not a strict, rigid boundary that, you know, ghosts won't cross over the line or anything. It's just seen more or less as a guide for an area that has an elevated level of alleged paranormal activity. Especially Chris Balzano. He's a big proponent of redefining the boundaries of the triangle to include towns like New Bedford and Fall River, and to expand it. Fall River is one of those edge towns that some people consider part of the triangle and others don't. But if you draw the traditional lines, it just skirts Fall River a little bit.
now it's to the point where I almost wonder if there even is a triangle anymore. That it's just an ever-reaching tentacle that has
We featured quite a few articles from the Brockton Enterprise.
places more and more people attention.
They were gracious enough to allow us to use them in exchange for a film credit. And in some of the cases where we wanted to feature articles from that big newspaper in Boston that shall remain unmentioned, we just if there was a story that was a pretty big story, we would look into the Brockton Enterprises archives and see if they had the same story, and a lot of times that they did. And so we just went with the Brockton Enterprise article instead of the one from that big newspaper up in Boston. So
Yeah, they covered it quite a bit.
yeah,
There's the Boston Magazine article again.
that was written by Lauren Coleman. That was actually the first mention of the Bridgewater Triangle in a publication,
Yep.
whereas Mysterious America was the first national mention of the Bridgewater Triangle. It was the first time it was brought to national attention. These are some cool shots here. This is a nice shot of Anawan Rock.
Years ago, my brother and I, we went and stayed in the Amazon rainforest in Peru. And the shamans there believe that the jungle itself has a spirit, has a soul. And I think that the Hockamock is one of those places. I feel as though the Hockamock has its own soul. It's a very old soul, and it has a memory. And some of the things that it's experienced
All of these Native American illustrations
holds those memories. And every now and
are all public domain images of wood block carvings that were done on the history of King Philip's War.
There's Johnny again.
Yeah, Johnny in the Woods again.
Very unique going on in the Bridgewater Hockomock area that we should at least acknowledge. And
Lauren did a really good job with his interview,
news
and
stories
we actually traveled up to Portland, Maine to shoot the interview at his museum. And he gave some really good sound bites, especially for the end of the film here.
all of these things are interconnected, and that's really the initial force that drove Coleman. So for us to ever fully understand what's going on in the Bridgewater Triangle, we have to look at it through
That footage was shot in Joe DeAndre's home office, where he continues to try to solve the mysteries of the Bridgewater Triangle and tries to organize expeditions into the swamps and organizational activities.
the fact that those things might kind of all be
He's always looking for members.
He is. He does put flyers up
Can't look
all over the place.
at a triangle as just an area where there's
Profile rock behind her again.
the underlying layers about the history, all of the geological factors.
That shot of Dighton Rock,
Who are studying it,
I had brought in my own lights to kind of shoot, to kind of light the rock from underneath to really emphasize the carvings and the shadows, to really give it some contrast, to make it show up well on camera. Because the lighting that they have in the museum isn't actually all that great. So bringing in extra lights helped to really show the inscriptions that are on there. The ranger that was working that day that let me in, he's like, I've never seen it look like that before. It's like, you guys need some new lights in here.
for something that 10 years ago people might not have ever heard of. It's now becoming one of the preeminent paranormal stories in the world.
I really modestly and humbly came up with this name, and I'm just surprised 30 years later that it's such a worldwide phenomenon.
The Bridgewater Triangle being an area
That's a really neat shot of Joe checking out the pond there.
obviously makes it very special in my opinion.
He's looking through his book. And he had his photo album with past photographs from his expeditions in the past.
After all the investigations,
It's the Carver cotton gin.
That's a really neat image that Wayne obtained.
Wayne has a lot of photographs like that. That's just one in particular that we used. But he does have quite a few.
every time I report,
As well as Mike Markowitz has hundreds and hundreds of EVPs from the area.
No, there's no question in my mind. The weirdest things happening and the most unexplained things happen here. And you can feel when that state forest.
These are some day for night shots in the Freetown State Forest.
Midnight,
Shot during the day, color corrected to look like dusk or evening.
that's something that you don't sense anywhere else. I can't be in the state forest that night. People with a gun.
That quote there gets a lot of chuckles when people are watching this film. Even with a gun, Alan was nervous about going into the Freetown State Forest.
something real happened. There's no other way. You take away the real events, and it's just a story. Stories go away.
I don't believe in the Bridgewater Triangle. I accept it.
And there you see the name of the two douchebags responsible for
Yeah.
this movie.
That's it.
Well, thank you very much for watching the director's commentary for the Bridgewater Triangle documentary. We hope you had a splendid time.
We included everything we could. There is a lot more.
Yeah, be sure to browse the additional bonus features on your Blu-ray and DVD.
I know. It's out there. It's good.
see this list of names coming up in front of you. These are all, we can't thank anybody in this list enough for the time that they gave to this project. The actual production was essentially a 2 or 3 man crew, but without these additional people that helped with their particular section of the film, or helping us to promote, or helping us to put this together in one way or another, it really would not have been possible. We're extremely proud of what we were able to achieve here with this, with a very, very low budget and a limited amount of resources. And we feel that it's unique to pretty much anything that's been done on the paranormal so far.
Yeah, we cover a lot in 90 minutes. Quite a bit of stories.
And thank you very much for watching.
That's it.